Yeah.
So there you go.
So, thank you. I've slightly updated the talk's premise because it's now how AI will take your job, right? And the reason for that, right? Well, actually, first, can you get your phones out? This is interactive presentation. I'm not going to ask anyone's questions. I'm not going to come to anybody specifically. I just need your broad engagement in this. If you could all just scan the QR code, hopefully it will take you to. There's only 3 questions that I'm going to ask along the way, and every single one of them will have red text on the screen. So if you see that, get ready to use your thumbs, basically. Is everybody in? Is it working? Have you got to the first question?
There's no active poll.
Oh, good. Yeah, I thought it might. How about now? You're all in. Hooray. So the question, I just want to poll the room first. Is AI going to take your job? And let's put the results up on screen. Right, we've got an early, that's confident. Okay, yeah, we're starting to get a bit more. All right, okay, interesting. Has everyone finished voting that's going to vote? Yeah, no one needs any more time. All right, that's a really interesting result. I disagree because I'm John and AI took my job until recently. You heard at the start, I'm a product designer. I've been doing it for about 10 years and to briefly summarize, I'm sure you probably all know what it is, but like to briefly summarize, it used to be called graphic design, and then the internet came along and it was called web design, and then software happens and web design got much more complex, and that's when it became kind of product design. Sometimes it's called UX design. That's kind of a niche sort of subset, but basically what my job is to work within a company or work outside of a company and help them build a product that solves a problem for somebody. And so, yeah, I lost my job to AI, and it was in July, and I sat down with a guy who claimed to be my boss, and he said, cost-cutting measures and artificial intelligence, you haven't got a job anymore. And they actually said that to like a third of the company that I was working at the same time. So that led me on a bit of a journey of introspection. A few of the people in this room have actually been part of that journey and kind of seen it from the outside. What they will know is that I did a lot of running. I spent a lot of time building a kitchen. I applied to a bunch of jobs. I got a job offer. It was great. That's me in the toilet, obviously, at the place that I was about to start work. But because I'd been working on a side project and I'd set it up as a company, and I disclosed that as part of signing a contract, they decided to pull the offer. Horrendous. So I'd gone on this huge kind of roller coaster of like, oh my God, I lost my job, everything's rubbish. And then they sent me the severance check and I was like, woohoo, everything's great. And then I realized that money is only mine to keep if I have another job. So I had to go and get one, and that was rubbish again. Got the offer, that was great. And then the offer getting pulled, that was awful. And I realized that I'd kind of fallen into this habit of just, well, I need to just replace what I've got with what I had. I need to go and find another job and go and work for somebody else. And I started asking some much bigger questions, particularly when this happened. And this was the text that I got from a friend who heard about the job offer getting rescinded. And that's all it took was what's next? What is next? And so I started to sort of look ahead and think about the sort of more broader thing. So this is a question that I was asking myself, and this is the next time for you to get your phones out and have a look on that app. It should automatically take you to the next poll, or you might have to press a button that takes you to the next poll. Can anyone just confirm that for me? Are you seeing the next thing? There's no active polls. One sec. Try this. Great. So there's 4 things. I want you to rank them. So money, hopefully we all know what money is. Fulfillment, broadly, hopefully you all know what fulfillment is. Duty, when I say working with a sense of duty, it would be like maybe if you're a teacher or a firefighter or something where you feel like, you know, the role that you're doing is part of the greater good. And then independence is, yeah, hopefully it's kind of your fulfillment for yourself. What are you working for? Oh my God, I've got it completely wrong. Just see the final rank coming in. Oh wow, we got a joint tie. Right, well, I got it completely wrong. I thought you were all going to vote for money. I think maybe being without a job, money was higher on my priority list. But yeah, interesting results there. Fulfillment, independence. You know, I think it kind of makes sense. So like once I sat down and said, right, well, what am I actually looking for? And in this case, independence was my top answer as well. I think that one of the things that sort of getting laid off, being made redundant kind of taught me was I don't really want to be aligned in somebody else's spreadsheet anymore. So I sat down, ranked those things, and then I asked myself a question, what is a job, right? What is a job? Lots of competing thought, not going to go into all of the kind of philosophical answers to that question or economic answers, but does anybody know who this is? Adam Smith, right? Wrote The Wealth of Nations. Interesting book. If you haven't read it, it's quite a big, thick book, and it's quite a hard tome to pass. But he basically saw jobs as kind of specialized tasks, right? It's around in the 1700s, so maybe it's an outdated view. But the whole point of working was to increase productivity and wealth, both for the individual, but also for the economy as a whole. And believed that the kind of key to that about finding jobs for people was about finding the specialized task that you could do that would increase productivity and wealth for everybody. Anybody know who this is? It's on the other side, Karl Marx. Right, Karl Marx, philosopher, among other titles, and viewed jobs in capitalist economies as exploitative and alienating, right? And that it reduced workers to instruments of production. When I started my job in product design, my last job in product design, I think I agree with Adam Smith. I thought I'm making everybody money, graphs going up, I'm making money, I'm enjoying myself. And as I got to the sort of end of that job, just before being made redundant, I think I was in the other end where I was like, this is actually, I've just been reduced to kind of being a cog in a machine. This is just, and so I think that actually both of these things can be true and that they kind of come and go in cycles. In product design, I use this kind of product maturity framework that I've repurposed for job maturity, which is when we're assessing whether to come up with a new product for something, and when we're looking at different ideas and how we can do this, doesn't matter if we're looking at a whole big problem like that we're trying to solve the whole big thing, or whether we're looking at just one component part, one little task to try and optimize. This is something that we can use to kind of do this. The last job that I had doing product design was working in the film and TV industry. I was working on payroll, was the most boring part of the film and TV industry. And if you think about it, like in order to get paid, you've got thousands of freelancers. They all need to submit timesheets. No one who works in film and TV wakes up to complete a timesheet. So we're trying to automate that task for them, right? Often you can't because it's much harder than it looks to get all of that information into the system. But we're trying to take something that's not possible and move it towards a point where it's automated because people want to, operate the camera or set up the lights or do the thing like lighting design, sound design, whatever. They don't want to spend their time an hour a week filling in a timesheet. So I like to try and, I was trying to think about jobs in this way and what makes a job defensible. Well, hopefully, what we're trying to do with technology is move all jobs to a point where they can be automated. Here are some examples. This is Shaky, right? This is the first, recognized as the first robot. This is from the 1970s, hence the grainy picture. This is Carl Rosen, one of the lead developers of Shaky. Shaky is the first robot, or hailed as the first robot that could kind of make its own decisions. It could reason using the inputs that it had, and it was actually kind of the pioneering part of robotics that we use in manufacturing. The old job, in this case, was factory assembly lines. We had people manufacturing widgets, right? And what the new jobs that came out of this in this kind of automation, once we automated the manufacturing of the widgets, we had people who were working in robotics, right? Doing the maintenance, doing the programming, doing the design. So the workforce kind of changed shape. It wasn't that we lost jobs. I mean, okay, maybe we lost immediate jobs on the factory floor, but it actually created a whole bunch of new jobs. It's the same thing with personal computing, right? Steve Jobs, one of the main proponents of, or had a huge impact on kind of personal computing, bringing personal computers to the mainstream. Old job, administrative and clerical jobs, people copying things out in triplicate in offices, putting real money into vacuum tubes and sending it to another side of the business. the new jobs that have become part of office work now, software development, IT support, digital marketing, right? All of these things that couldn't exist without having a personal computer in front of you. Again, workforce changed shape. Another white guy in front of a computer, right? Tim Berners-Lee, rise of the internet, old bookstores, travel agents, things that you had to go and visit, to go and speak to a person, have that service done for you, often in a shop on the high street. Now we have e-commerce with digital content creation. Again, the workforce has changed shape. Self-checkouts, they're taking people's jobs, right? A whole row of cashiers with conveyor belts. Now, the new reality is that you just wait ages for someone who's really busy to come over and tell you that you look visibly over 25. But the supermarket's changed shape. And then we've got, does anybody know what this is? I know you probably do. GitHub Copilot, right? So the old way, and this is something that's happening right in front of our eyes now, the old way was that we had software engineers who'd spend a large part of their professional time doing something called pair programming, where you've got a junior developer who's trying to learn new skills, and you've got a more senior developer who is coaching them and working with them, and they're working together to solve the problem. Now, essentially, GitHub Copilot is something that works in the space where you're doing the coding, and it's doing suggestions, and it's basically they marketing it as a pair programmer for you. What we're seeing there, I think the job is stayed the same, right? We've still got developers, but what's happening is it's raising the bar for the kind of the lowest entry level candidates into that role. So like where you used to be able to just kind of get away with adding a button to a screen or something, now you're expected to understand how to build out, a whole app right from scratch, but you've kind of got the help of the Copilot tool that can interrogate your code and things along the way. So again, the workforce is changing shape. And even though that Smith and Marx had completely opposing views and lived completely, 100 years apart, so they never got to discuss them, what they agreed on was essentially that jobs are about creating value. How do we measure value? You can see I went on a proper down a proper wormhole, rabbit hole with this. So this is how we measure value in the UK. There's a few different ways. It's like the Office of National Statistics has published a lot of data on jobs and productivity. This shows that even though in the 70s and in the 80s and in the 90s, where we saw the first self-checkout, and in the 2000s, we had all of these technological revolutions that happened, and yet broadly, all right, there's some dips, but broadly, the average line across that is that we've had the same rate of employment for the last 50 years. However, productivity per worker has been going up this whole time. All right, again, pandemic, but otherwise, broad trend is that we're more productive. So we've got the same number of people, same percentage of people in work, but every single person is becoming more productive. But actually, per hour, they're less productive. So what that means is we're working longer hours, but we're seeing diminishing returns, right? Same number of people in work. Output overall is higher, but we're spending too much time in work. So, maybe we're working too much. I think we're seeing this. I think you're seeing in the rise of companies like Headspace and things like that, we're dealing with a mental health crisis. And I think that, it's not just people recognizing it for the first time, but there's actually proof that, the type of work that we're doing now is kind of burning us out. We're seeing burnout at the highest levels. We're seeing strikes across the country and things because they're not getting compensated well enough. They're working too long. And we're seeing massive increase in screen time, right? All of these things are kind of badly affecting us. So should we work less, right? Is the answer that we work less? Probably, right? Probably we should. We've seen that there are trials for 4-day working weeks. We've seen trials for things like universal basic income. There are lots of things that we're experimenting with. But yeah, there's still a lot of progress to be made. It's really interesting in a lot of the trials that they've done. I think if you read this bit in particular, 89% of the companies that trialed a 4-day working week kept it. And it's because we're more productive. We don't need to be working as much, right? We could be working less. So what's this got to do with AI, right? All of this is where I was kind of getting to with this. AI took my job, according to the company that I work for. Is AI a threat to your job? Possibly, right? But are there other real threats that we need to be looking at? Globalization, that's I think the real reason that my job was laid off is because I flew to India last year to train a team in Hyderabad of 5 people that cost the same as my salary to do a very similar job to what I was doing. And I very happily went out there and had the 5 days and it was great and I was training them up. And then a year later, I didn't have my job anymore. And I was like, oh, I wonder why that was. Well, what we're seeing is that you don't need, with the pandemic taught everybody remote work is possible. Lots of companies are kind of going against that. But actually, there is a bit of a global economic shift occurring. The part of Hyderabad that I went to in India, a whole third of the city has been built in the last 15 years because of the amount of money that's being poured into there. It's a real threat. It's a real threat to knowledge work in the UK because we don't have a lot of the skills. We don't have a lot of the things that we need in order to kind of future-proof ourselves. We don't have, we're very reliant on services in the UK. So globalization is a real threat. Monopsonies. Does anyone know what a monopsony is versus monopoly? This is first time. Right. A monopoly is where like one company is in complete control of the selling of that thing, right? So Google is often held up as a monopoly for kind of advertising online because they are the place that you can do that, right? Facebook and stuff, they are eating into it a little bit, but like they are a monopoly on that. They're definitely a monopoly on search, right? They have more than a 90% market share. Monopoly is the same thing, but it's where you are in control of, you are the only buyer, right? So Amazon, Uber's a really good example of this. Amazon's a really good example of this. But it's where people don't have bargaining power. You lose bargaining power if you're dealing with a monopoly. If you're a publisher and you're trying to publish a book, if you don't do that via Amazon, right, it's very hard to sell a book. So monopolies are a real threat to us, perhaps a bigger threat than monopolies, because in monopolies, perhaps you don't buy the service, but if your whole work relies on selling it to somebody, selling your skills or selling a product to somebody else, and there's only one buyer, you're not setting the price for that thing, they are. So, that's something to read. And then feudalism, I thought if Age of Empires had taught me anything, I thought we'd long escaped feudalism, but there's a thing called techno-feudalism. Basically, we're seeing lower job security because work has been kind of platformized, right? Like if you think about the gig economy, you think about Uber, you think about Deliveroo, things like that, like a lot of work has moved from steady kind of contract-based work where there is some security to kind of the gig economy, which was sold as a really beneficial thing. Oh, I can just choose when I work, right? But actually the way a lot of these platforms are engineered is that they control both supply and demand. And so things like Uber, where they have surge pricing and things like that, they're kind of calling people out to come and work. But yeah, we're seeing much lower job security because of this. So will AI take your job? Probably it will. The reason that I say this is because I think if we go back to all of the examples that I showed earlier, like when we're applying technology, we're trying to take something that is initially not possible and move it towards automation. So it probably will. But the way that you can actually deal with this, and I promise this is the whole kind of crux of where I know we've been on lots of tangents. The whole crux of this is that you can future-proof yourself by accepting that change is inevitable and then working out how you can actually future-proof your skills and recognize the skills that you have through something called legacy-free reinvention. This is something that we use in design all of the time. It's essentially thinking in first principles about the things that you do and getting rid of all of the gumph and just focusing on the bits that provide value, right? So the way that you actually apply this, legacy-free reinvention, is to take a task that you do, and you can take any task, and at each stage of it, think about what you're trying to achieve, and then say, how could, if I applied new, modern, current technology to this, how could I achieve the same result quicker with that? So if you take something like tying your shoelaces, this is something that, I don't understand why we all have laces on our shoes, because surely Velcro is more effective, right? It's quicker, it's easier. Why am I bothering, if I trip over it, if they become loose, it becomes a trip hazard or whatever. Like surely Velcro is NASA used it. Didn't they invent Velcro, right? Like they use it so why do we do this? Surely that's the more modern technology that we could apply to it If you take that same principle and start to apply that to yourself, to your job, and start deconstructing the things that you can do, then you will find the component parts that are the most valuable. Another way to think about it is, what can you delegate? If you were thinking about your job today, what could you delegate? Anything that you could delegate it, right? If you can find some software to take notes for you in a meeting, do it, right? Why bother taking the notes yourself? Just do it. Lean into that stuff and try and delegate it, and you will find that there are lots of, because it's in the news and because it's kind of the paradigm at the moment, a bit of a zeitgeist, there are lots of AI tools that are out there to kind of do things. Don't try and holistically take your whole job and give it to AI. Just take little parts of it and the bits that you can delegate. And anything that you can't delegate, right? Anything that you think, oh, it's just too complicated or this doesn't exist, lean into those skills, right? Lean into those activities, lean into those tasks, because they're the parts of the task where you are valuable. And then use legacy reinvention to think about how you're doing that thing and whether there's new modern technology. And don't be afraid of learning and using technology, but don't sit down, whatever you do, and try and go, how do I completely do all of this using technology? Start with the stuff that you can't delegate. Anything that you can delegate, get rid of it. So, final question. Hopefully it's working. I'll press the button. I'm going to ask you the same question I asked you at the start, is will AI take your job? Can anyone remember what the result was the first time? I think it was. I think if I go back to this, yeah. Yeah, it was 89%. It's 89%. Now, I set myself a goal at the start of this, which I said was, I want that yes to be 100%. I want you to all feel like AI is going to take your job. I'm really interested to find out what jobs you have that you don't think is going to get taken. But that's me. Thank you very much. Let's go and enjoy the drinks. Great. Thank you for having me.